Welcome back, students. Okay, let's jump right into today's explainer where we are going to unpack sundowning. Now, if you're studying dementia care or maybe you're actively supporting a loved one right now, you already know that the late afternoon and early evening can just bring this intense wave of unexpected challenges. So we're going to break down this critical phase in dementia care. We'll be looking directly at the clinical realities and, more importantly, the practical solutions. Here is our roadmap for this module. We've got 4 key areas. First, the sundowning scenario. Second, defining sundown syndrome. Third, brain changes and triggers. And fourth, effective caregiver strategies. All right, part 1, the sundowning scenario, a very common evening struggle. I really want you to picture this situation. It's dusk. You have a father with dementia who becomes suddenly, almost inexplicably restless and exhausted. He starts pacing around, frantically searching for his checkbook. And the well-meaning caregiver responds with total logic, saying, "We don't use checks anymore, remember? I pay all your bills online. Sit down and watch TV." Now, that sounds completely logical, right? I mean, it's the factual truth. But in the context of dementia care, hitting someone with a logical truth like that is actually highly counterproductive. Before we dig into the clinical data, I want you to just ask yourself, why doesn't this approach work? Why does arguing about online bill pay fail to calm a dementia patient down here? Why does trying to anchor them to our present reality usually just result in way more frustration for everyone involved? Keep that right in the back of your mind as we transition into the actual science behind the behavior. Which brings us to section 2, defining sundown syndrome. What is actually happening? So here is the absolutely crucial point to understand. Sundown syndrome is not a disease itself. Actually, scratch that. It's better described as a specific group of behaviors and symptoms that are intimately tied to the time of day, typically popping up right around sunset or the early evening. It's this behavioral phenomenon that accompanies dementia, completely altering a person's demeanor the second daylight starts to fade. And what's truly challenging here is the sheer variety of symptoms you might encounter, whether you're in a clinical or a home setting. I mean, we're talking a spectrum ranging from simply ignoring directions or feeling heightened anxiety, all the way to outright physical aggression, pacing, and wandering. Think back to our earlier scenario with the father, right? His sudden restlessness, the confusion over the checkbook, the pacing. Those are classic textbook presentations of these core symptoms. Moving right along to section 3, brain changes and triggers, the physiological causes. So, in a typical brain, your internal clock is highly regulated. It keeps a normal, healthy sleep and wake cycle ticking along. But as dementia progresses, it actually physically damages the specific areas in the brain that regulate that internal clock. The result? The whole cycle gets thrown out the window. This usually manifests as increased napping during the day and then severe difficulty staying asleep at night. Basically, their biological timekeeper is broken. Now, while the exact root cause of the syndrome still remains a bit of a mystery, we do know from the data that specific external and physical triggers can rapidly escalate these symptoms. Reduced evening light is a massive one, but it's also heavily tied to the patient's physical state. Are they extra tired? Are they feeling generally anxious? Or conversely, do they have all this pent-up energy from a super boring, understimulating day? All of these factors essentially converge right at desk to create the perfect storm for sundowning. Finally, let's look at section 4, effective caregiver strategies, evidence-based interventions. Environmental changes are absolutely your first line of defense as a caregiver, and it really comes down to a super simple 3-step process. When you see that sun starting to go down, immediately turn on the lights to artificially brighten up the room. Then, close the drapes and the blinds. Why? Because you've got to remove confusing shadows. As the light shifts outside, the shadows inside stretch and move, and to a brain experiencing dementia, those shadows can cause intense fear, confusion, and agitation. Taking control of the lighting stops that trigger dead in its tracks. And alongside lighting, auditory control is huge. You absolutely must create a calm environment that is completely free of loud noises or sudden disruptions. If the television is blasting or there's just chaotic household noise going on, a patient who is already on edge with sundown anxiety is going to easily become overstimulated. So keep it calm, keep it quiet, and keep the environment predictable. Okay, let's bring this all the way back to that scenario we analyzed at the very start of our lesson. Notice the stark behavioral shift in the caregiver's response here. Instead of stubbornly arguing reality by saying, "We pay bills online," the effective caregiver uses a brilliant technique of validation and distraction.
They say, the checks haven't come in yet, let's go look at that photo album. By validating the patient's concern, acknowledging the missing checks without fighting over the facts, and then immediately pivoting to a relaxing, enjoyable activity, you completely diffuse the anxiety instead of amplifying it. It's a real game changer.
And finally, here's the trick. Managing the evening actually starts during the day. Because we know that fatigue and boredom are major triggers, caregivers have to adjust the daytime routine. You want to provide adequate, engaging activity during the day so they don't have that pent-up energy, but you have to balance that carefully so they don't become over-fatigued. And this is critical. Limit daytime napping to just a couple of hours. This helps reset that damaged internal clock as best as humanly possible, which drastically reduces evening restlessness.
I want to leave you with a really vital question as we wrap up this explainer. Look at your own caregiving space, or maybe the clinical environment you work in. Are you truly optimizing your routine to eliminate those creeping evening shadows? Are you managing boredom and fatigue throughout the day? You see, understanding the science of sundowning is only half the battle. Actually applying these environmental and behavioral shifts is where you will fundamentally improve the quality of care. So are you ready to take these tools and change the way the sun sets in your environment?